So I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about two things, about Bell Hook's book, We Real Cool, and if I can get to it in this video, how this relates to cultural anthropology in my own work in the Punjab. And there I'll talk about intersectionalities as a sociological, cultural, anthropological methodology of field research, upon which I based my dissertation at Yale University. So We Real Cool is about the black male body in a white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal society. Many of you who are familiar with Bell Hooks as a writer will know that white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy is a theory, and therefore also a phraseology that Bell Hooks came up with very early in her career, maybe even as far back as Feminism from Margin to Center, where she talks about how singularly race or singularly sexism or singularly classism could not really look at subjectivities as they are lived in the flesh. Those are my words. And so she does this in classic Bell Hooks style. I believe this is her first treatise to the subject of masculinity. She talks about, of course, men, masculinity, hegemonic, popular culture. All of these things she talks about throughout her work, but this is her first work that is specifically on the subject of men. Let me just go ahead and say right from the get-go, it's a cool cover. It's a muted, it's a simple, and it differently from had this been a torso shot or any of the iconic shots of black men's bodies that circulate that she talks about here. This is intimate, personal, something very different. The title, of course, is in a sense, an homage to one of her most influential writers. I would believe, and I believe I've read her talk about Gwendolyn Brooks and her very short poem, We Real Cool. We real cool, we skip school, we sing sin, we thin gin, it's a good poem, but you have to read it. And so she connects herself in this title to a heritage of black women looking at, talking about, and importantly, talking to black men in their environment. And so linking that tells you two things that you will see in this book that Bell Hooks does, is that she, again, I say in classic Bell Hooks style, she uses autobiography. And that's where I say, when I talk about the flesh, of what does this mean? Well, in all of her books, she talks about her brother. She talks about her father as men and how masculinity played out before her. And she carries that, and that's what this book does. She carries that sort of black male body from a home space to popular culture to political sphere. So in a sense, she produces black male subjectivity in these different spaces. Now that's important because as a cultural geographer, what I've done in my dissertation is do the exact same thing with my own field work. So I've used biography and also my own autobiography in entering those spaces and accessing those spaces, and how I produce the subject in those spaces. But I build other people's biographies through my own field work, building their narratives, looking at home, looking at public spaces, and looking at how different kinds of public spaces are defined. So, for example, workplace as a kind of public sphere, public parks as a kind of public sphere, literally a sphere. The NGO, and because I was looking at gayness, and so I specifically wanted to look at spaces where gayness, in a sense, materialized in the flesh, and NGO spaces, and so on. And so that's exactly what what Bell Hooks does in this book, is look at black male subjectivity in those spaces. And so, like I said, I'll get to in the next video, apparently, looking at this time limit already. is that why that applies to my work in the Punjab. Um, but she really talks about sexual acting out. She talks about boyhood. She talks about the relationships between father and men, fathers and sons, friendships. She talks about different spaces. So basically, she locates the black body in different relationships, um, in love, in school, um, and she talks about stigma. And when I say stigma, I consider violence to be one of the most extreme and abject expressions of stigma, of hatred of the other. And so, what she ultimately talks about, and I'm not really like covering the specifics of this book because I think you can imagine when we're talking about the intersection of gender, race, and class, we have to talk about, chapter 1, for example, plantation patriarchy. In all her books, she talks about plantation patriarchy. In this book in particular, let me see something that I've highlighted. She talks about Moynihan, which significantly, she says, Moynihan's report came just in time to reinforce the notion that it was important for black males to fight in imperialist wars. And, and lo and behold, even decades later, the black male body is still on the front line of any American war, from Iraq on to, Kuwait to now Afghanistan. Overwhelmingly, black male bodies are represented on the front lines. And when I mean the front lines, I don't just mean in the military, but I mean literally there you go, fight boy. And what's interesting now is that Moynihan's research is resurfacing in sociology because people do want to account for culture. And what I'm saying is that as a cultural geographer, as a sociologist in a sense, kind of cultural geography and sociology, as a kind of sociology, Bell Hooks provides that template for how to look at subjectivities, not in a sense cut off, and you look at a person intensely in one space, as many other kinds of studies tend to do, but to look at to keep the body as cohesive, and then put that body in different spaces. So in this Moynihan report, for example, she's looking at the world of politics, and she directly starts to link that to the flesh, to the lived experience of being black male in America, and then of course the people who live with and around and love and know or despise and hate black men. She talks about all of it. Very little is written about the extent to which the image of emasculation that racist white males projected onto black males was indicative of the feelings of impotence many white men felt in their relationships with powerful white women. Very little is written about the extent to which the image of emasculation that racist white males projected onto black males was indicative of the feelings of impotence. Now, even that one phrase, she's talking about the dick thing. This is in the first chapter, so she goes on to elaborate on this very basic sort of plantation politics, that if black women's bodies are available, accessible to white men on the plantation, and you see that all these little cocoa babies running around on the plantation, and yet both the white women and the black women dare not name who the father is for fear of severe punishment, you start to see how the white woman and the black man sort of exotify. It's threatening that that line will ever be crossed to sort of bring down the entire racial order. In a sentence, she says this, and then she elaborates this on throughout the entire book. So this is why I think this is one of the most important books, and I'll just end with this, with what I subnamed the book. It's called We Real Cool, Black Men and Masculinity, and I subnamed it Guide for Anyone Who Wants to Love a Black Man, especially should he be one himself. Excellent reading. Stay tuned for the next video.